All right, everybody, welcome again to our Flexible Dieting Institute research review. I'm going to continue our series. We're maybe coming to an end just discussing quality matters when it comes to food. This one is a slight tangent from just quality, but at the same time, I think you'll see where that kind of dovetails in. I found this one. Let me get over here for you. In a Journal of Molecular Metabolism, the title of this study is Diet-Induced Changes in the Lean Brain, because they did this with very lean, healthy subjects for a reason. Hypercaloric, high-fat, high-sugar snacking decreases serotonin transporters in the human hypothalamic region. And I mean, that title alone, there's just a lot going on, and we're gonna kind of pick that apart as we go. But two of the things I want you to focus on right now. This is a study looking at the difference between stacking sugar into a hypercaloric diet. So if somebody is in the process of overeating, they're over consuming food, so they are gaining weight. Is there a difference between eating sugar versus fat? Is there a difference between eating sugar or fat with meals or as snacks? So you'll see in the setup of the study, the methodology, how they had four different subject groups and then a control group. And specifically, there has never been a study showing the direct correlation to a reduction of serotonin because of serotonin's implication with satiety and hunger modulation. So all that to say that there are ways of gaining weight, as you will see, that can decrease serotonin to the point where you just have increasing hunger. And that is something we often see with people who start eating more food. And I mean, in all kinds of demographics of clients, it never surprises me to hear somebody say, wow, as soon as I started eating more food, my hunger went up. When I was eating less food, my hunger went down. So I think you're going to see some of the mechanisms here of why that is, but some really, really, really solid habit takeaways as far as how you might want to organize your food intake. So I'll just move you guys to the side here so I can see my titles. Just as a premise, this is one of their opening statements in the introduction. It is evident that there's a relationship between the brain serotonin system and obesity. Although it is clear that drugs affecting the serotonin system regulate appetite and food intake, it is unclear whether changes in their serotonin system are cause or consequence of obesity. And this was a huge, huge part of this. And I have a little sidebar talking about serotonin uptake, reuptake inhibitors in a little bit, because we know when you do things like antidepressants, the risk of obesity just skyrockets. And there is some interesting interplay, because not only do the neurons in our brain release serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter largely associated with happiness and contentment, but our enteric neurons, we have more neurons, the cells in our brains that control our central nervous system. We have more central nervous system neurons in our gut, in our enteric, what's called our enteric brain, than even in our skull. And those can release serotonin and so forth. So really, really complex, incredible study. Just never seen anything even remotely like this, which is why it intrigued me. And what they are saying here is, we know serotonin, hunger go hand in hand, serotonin, obesity go hand in hand, but is it cause or effect? And this was something that they wanted to really look at. So these are some slides I just kind of picked out. I apologize, some of them aren't super high quality. I'm at the mercy of Google Images, but just to show you a little bit of the serotonin function. So in the brain, as I said, it helps control mood, fear, anxiety, all those kind of things, clarity of thought, mostly, as I said, just happiness, just that sense of contentment. But in the gut, and not only in the gut, in that enteric brain, but in the neurons in our head, it's also very much related to satiety, as I said, cravings, digestion, even peristalsis, how we move food through the GI system. And in previous research reviews, you may remember me continually continuously talking about the hypothalamus and its role in hunger cues. You're going to see that come up in a big way in this study. This is a picture of just a neuron, a synapse. So you see that junction where you get that neuron to fire with an action potential, and then we get a response. So if you look over here to the left, serotonin reuptake transporter, and then serotonin receptors, there is a phenomena which when we have serotonin being transmitted across these junctions and it's doing its thing, it is signaling the body to be sated, because when we have more serotonin being released, we feel happier, we feel more content, and that translates to satiety. It directly impacts hunger. When we don't have as much, when that is decreasing, then we're going to feel less happy, and you're going to be more sensitive to hunger cues. The sidebar, I want to mention it now just while you see this visual here. The sidebar is that when we take those serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, then what happens is we end up having more external and less internal serotonin. So you will see that is why that creates hunger, why people who take things like Zoloft and so forth, Prozac, end up typically with more hunger. Anyway, like I said, that's a sidebar, has nothing to do with this study, but they mentioned it as a tangent, and I thought it was a very important thing to talk about, just in passing. So the way serotonin helps regulate this whole system is not that different from insulin, leptin, ghrelin, all those kinds of things. As I mentioned, when we have an increasing amount of glucose in our bloodstream, we release insulin, obviously. That helps to trigger the hypothalamus to give us signals of satiety, which also then are related to serotonin. Serotonin is actually elevating when we have things like insulin as a mechanism. So, for example, the term hangry. You also know when you finally get some food in your stomach and you calm back down and you're happier, you're sated. That's all related to this whole mesolimbic system. Which I kind of showed here. So all of those things kind of going up in unison, they're all related. And serotonin is a mediator of all of this. So indeed, serotonin acts as an anorexigenic signal. Food intake increases both extracellular serotonin levels and serotonin turnover in the brain, while serotonin inhibits food intake and promotes satiety. In addition, neurochemical depletion of brain serotonin, as well as genetic and pharmacological manipulations of several parts of the serotonin system in rodents, result in obesity and hyperphagia. And that's an important thing to consider, because even when people are talking about taking SSRIs or other mechanisms, sometimes birth control, where they say, wow, I gained 30 pounds when I started that medication. Your body can't make body fat out of thin air. It's usually going to induce that from hyperphagia. It's going to make you hungrier. And that's what this does. In this particular study, looking at these 4 control groups, only one decreases serotonin, and it's not subtle. And so that in turn doesn't do anything to you metabolically. It just makes you hungrier. So you are going to eat more. So one of the things you're going to see in the study setup is that they wanted an ad libitum component because they wanted people to be able to respond to their hunger. So thus lower SERT, which is serotonin transporters, is clearly associated with obesity. However, whether this is cause or consequence and whether this is explained by BMI per se or excessive food intake remains to be determined, which is what they set out to do here. So let me get into the methodology. I say it a little bit better here. I kind of pulled all that out. So let me jump over here. So they picked out, that's supposed to be 39. Sorry about that. My typo there. So 39 healthy, lean men, the average age 22 and a half, the average BMI 22 and a half. So pretty lean. They were randomized, as I said, into 4 hypercaloric diets plus the control group, which was just they were just there. Eat whatever you want. You're going to be the control. The way they set it up mechanistically was a 40% calorie surplus. And so just as an example, if you were eating 2,000 calories a day, if that was your maintenance level, then you would eat 2,800 calories on this diet, or at least that was the goal. So they did a really good job. I'm not going into all of the details of the study setup because this was a really complex study. But just to let you know, they did metabolic testing work, and they did diet journal analysis, and they looked at exactly what their basal metabolic needs were. And they said, okay, now that we know that, here's how with the group we're going to increase calories, but we want it to be ad libitum eating. You are in control of your meals, but with the meals that you like to eat and you feel sated, we're then going to have you eat another 40% calories. So there's a looseness to that on purpose, that ad libitum portion, because they wanted the subjects to be able to respond to their hunger. So this is how they did it. So in these 4 hypercaloric diets, they had, so HSHF stands for high sugar, high fat. HS is just high sugar. So they gave a supplement, 240 calories, kind of like a shake. What am I thinking of? One of those, like Ensure, something like that. That would be about 16% protein, 49% carbs, 35 fat. And then the group that had high sugar, it was their drink of choice. It just had to be no fat or protein, same 240 calories, but just a sugary drink, juice, soda, something like that. This is a 6-week diet. It was done with SPECT imaging, so radioactive ions, potassium, looking at exactly chemically what's happening in the brain. So pretty solid way of studying this. And over here, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the different groups. The high fat, high sugar, via that additional liquid supplement, they did this in 2 groups of 2. So the high fat, high sugar, they did it 3 times a day with their 3 main meals. And that's what they ate. They were just instructed to eat 3 meals a day. Or they did that, they gave those extra calories as in between meal snacks. So one group was eating 3 meals a day, one group was eating 6 meals a day, 3 meals plus these 3 snacks, all with that 40% increase in calories. Then you had the high sugar alone, not high sugar and fat, and they did the same thing, 3 meals a day plus that extra 240 calories in just pure sugar form, or having the high sugar in between meals. So, okay. So we're going to skip right to some results. So this is weight gain. And one of the things that it's important to note is look how small this is to the side. This is only 6 weeks. So the amount of weight gained in kilograms, you're looking at the high sugar frequency group. I forgot to say that. These S's and F's. So high fat, high sugar in the same meal, and then the high fat, high sugar with more frequent meals is the F. So first of all, the control group, pretty cool. They just kind of stayed very, very stable, lost actually about a pound. And these group, all 4 of these groups, they said was statistically the same, because you're looking at about 2 kilograms to 3. So in 6 weeks, there was no more than a 2-pound difference. Most places here, about a half a pound, maybe 3/4 of a pound. So they said we accomplished our goal in the fact that we wanted an isocaloric study, because we're most interested in the changes in brain serotonin levels. We're not interested in who loses the most body fat, and they shouldn't have really seen much of a change. If you were to check these people out in actual body weight, so extend the scale from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 kilograms of weight lost to their actual body size, like 80, 90 kilograms, you would see these things shrink to where there's just no difference. They would look like four bar graphs that are just the same when you take them to that scale. So I just wanted to point that out in terms of how they set this up in terms of visual scale. Now, if you are really, 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 really interested in trying to extrapolate out any minute differences, even though this is statistically insignificant, you might say, well, the the high sugar, more frequent meals, they actually gain the least. So lower fat, more frequent meals with more sugar, because the group that had the high fat, high sugar, you remember that had about 19% protein. So it's more like a meal replacement supplement. This high sugar group did not even get that protein bump. So it was even more, statistically more sugar than just the sugar and fat. So a little prelude to saying, well, maybe fat's kind of the culprit here and not sugar. So let's look at the next graph, the calories actually consumed. So they were supposed to eat, again, just ad libitum. The way they set up this study design in the first place was to see what their average calorie intake was, what their normal functional metabolic rate may be. And they said, but you guys eat whatever you want to eat, just eat to hunger. And we're going to give you this extra food supplement in the form of a sugary drink or fat and sugar, and we'll see what happens. So again, all the groups, again, all lean, healthy. When I showed you that the subject groups were an average of, I think, 22 and a half years old, there's only a 1.5 standard deviation of years. So they were all under 25 years old, between 21 and maybe 24 years old, all within a point or so in the BMI. So once again, as they randomized these people into 4 different groups, they really nailed having a pretty even subject group. I mean, they wanted, even though there are 5 to 8 people in each one of these groups, they didn't want outliers to really skew it. And so they just really didn't. So then with when you add in the extra supplemental calories here, that's what it looked like. So again, when you look at this, it even though there are some little deviations, it's pretty similar. That should not cause you to scrutinize anything out of sorts. So this just shows the difference in percentage of carbohydrates and fats because of what they were allocated. So, again, nothing necessarily to show here except that people followed their directions and so forth. Okay, so here's the ball game. Serotonin binding activity in the high fat, high sugar frequency group was 30% reduced. The other 3 hypercaloric diet groups, and in the control group, there was no significant change in serotonin binding over the 6 weeks. So before I get to some of the discussion points and then open it to you guys for some questions and comments, you have these 5 groups. One is the control. They didn't have a calorie increase. Therefore, there was not any weight gain. The other 4, high sugar and high fat combined, 240 calories per meal, 3 times a day. So around 7, right? Actually, that would be close, 750, 800 calories extra in mostly sugar and fat in either just 3 meals a day, and that's all, or in between meals. So they had their normal meals plus those 3 supplements. So 3 meals a day with the high fat sugar supplement added to that meal or separate. And then the high sugar only, not an increase in fat, just 240 extra calories of pure sugar added to their meals, or not added to their meals, added in between meals. So out of all 5 of those groups, only one produced a 30% drop in serotonin, which would be very significant in how you perceive hunger, happiness, mood, things like that. And it was the group that was high fat, high sugar in between meals. So the increase of calories with meals added weight gain. Those people gained body fat, but it did not decrease serotonin. Like I said, there's a lot of moving parts to this. And so I want to make sure everybody has a chance to discuss and think about what exactly we can derive from this. But let me go through a couple slides where I break down a couple of their decisions or discussion points and mine. So these were, again, lean, healthy male subjects. That's pretty specific. You can't necessarily say that is indicative then of everybody, of every demographic. Lean, these were lean people. We don't know if somebody had a 40 BMI, if they would respond the same. But what they wanted to see, what they wanted to research, and go back to the first couple slides, this has always been a question: which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it the fact that somebody's obese that we see these changes in serotonin, or is there a specific mechanism that causes serotonin to be decreased? So this was very specific for those two reasons. As I said, the only decrease in serotonin was when there was high fat, high sugar, not high sugar alone, and only when the surplus was between meals, so adding to snacking. So if we just stopped right here and didn't discuss anymore, I would walk away saying, okay, bad idea to snack with added fat. If I need a snack between meals, maybe I need to consider my main, as we've kind of called them in our system, anchor meals and core meals, the meals where you have some protein, have some fibrous carbohydrate, probably some starchy carbohydrate, an amount of fat that would be appropriate for those food source combinations. If those are our actual meals and I need a snack between meals, this would indicate if I'm going into a calorie surplus, I'm better off to make sure those are high sugar snacks and not fat, or I'm going to have a 30% reduction in serotonin. This did not look at weight maintenance. So I can't necessarily say that, wow, I should never have fat in my diet, in my snacks, if I'm on a calorie deficit and losing weight. But it does show something that can and should be investigated further later. And I'm not sure how far they would get into even implying that would cross over. But previous research correlations between serotonin and obesity, there was always that negative correlation, which I stated, and yet they were indeterminate which one was causal, if at all. So this study shows it's not the obesity causing serotonin changes, but it's the hypercaloric, high fat, high sugar snacking. So a highly palatable food. You can eat sugar. You can eat, again, I mean, I don't want anybody to be in a hypercaloric situation. First of all, we don't want you to be gaining body fats if that's not necessary for your health. If you need to lose body fat or maintain, then obviously that's where this comes into play. The high fat, high sugar groups consumed more. I told you that. So this is just one piece of the puzzle: longer meal cycles to utilize acute energy. So again, I'm coming back to the juxtaposition. What if people were actually in a calorie deficit? Was the fact that this particular study showed you could add the extra calories to your meals instead of between meals, and even though you still gained body fat, just those longer meal cycles, the time between meals being longer, the mechanism of glucose disposal, of using energy, of bringing blood products down to a more homeostatic normal level, that has to be tied to why serotonin levels remained unchanged. The fact that you just keep spiking and spiking and spiking insulin, which would then essentially probably desensitize serotonin, is probably where that comes from, this result from the study. And then, as I mentioned with that sidebar about SSRIs, we don't want to spend too much time talking about that. So anyway, as I said, this was a really, really specific study, and I thought it gives us another spoke in the wheel when we discuss food quality, and as we try to organize how we create meals and so forth. I think there's something definitely to take away. So let me stop my screen share here and open this up to some questions. We have our birthday boy, Kevin Brunacini, Dr. Brunacini. We have Dr. Jen Souders, our medical director, everybody else. So let me bring in Kevin first. And Kevin, your only restriction is you cannot say, this is not surprising. You can't use that phrase, but give me your first reaction otherwise.
Good thing I switched to sweet tarts for my pre-workout.
There
It's
you
bad
go.
news for Reese's. I wonder if the mechanism is tied to just typical physiology in the sense of if it's combined with fat and sugar, if the fat is not going to be utilized, it's just shuttled to just be disposed of or to be stored. Whereas that's the if you want to call it the relay station. Whereas sugar, there's more interplay with between circulating blood glucose and glycogen. Therefore, it's more innocuous to be kind of hidden. Whereas fat, it's stored and then that just builds if that's consistent. But I wonder if that's the mechanism physiologically speaking to give that kind of a disadvantage versus just sugar based foods.
If we saw a big difference in body fat gain, if that's what this was about, that's probably where my head would go. I don't know enough about the neuromechanisms of serotonin to say that what you just described about fat versus sugar, uh, how that would change serotonin. That's where my mind first went to the fact that with longer spans between meals, you just have a chance for serotonin to become or less chance for it to become desensitized. And so your body, just like an SSRI, that serotonin is there, but you have more of it external to the neurons. And so even though it's doing its job, it's actually making you hungrier. And that's why those people gain weight. And so I think the fact that we have a chance to clear that out and we're not just constantly spiking serotonin is why we become, because the body basically is saying, well, we don't need as much. That's why I'm going to start slashing production. So in that group, it was reduced by 30%.
That's pretty cool. When you think, just the whole process of that, it's a process that's just you wouldn't think of otherwise. We're just by default going to the physiology, which I'm sure is still just the largest indicator of how things are moving. But that's not to say that this has that the serotonin connection doesn't have any weight to pull. Um, I'll just stop there. I'm just taking it all in because it's just really fascinating to learn about.
How about you, Jen?
Yeah, I'm with Kevin. It's a bit of a really interesting and maybe a bit of a head scratcher in some regards. One of the things that I thought was interesting was everybody maintained their eating to hunger, their maintenance level, despite having all of these extra calories. I thought that was actually very interesting because, I would have expected no matter what the method of inducing extra caloric intake would be, that I was surprised that the maintenance calories did not drop in the groups that didn't have a decrease in serotonin. I mean, I think in the group that has the high fat, high sugar, and the lower serotonin, I think we could make some conclusions about the role of serotonin there, or at least some tenuous ones. But it really does surprise me that others, did not eat less. And I wonder how much of it is because when you combine sucrose, which sucrose is metabolized in the liver into glucose and fructose, and glucose is disposed of as glucose, and the body takes care of that really well. But fructose is actually metabolized in the liver more like a fat, as we know. So when it's combined with a high fat meal, then you would expect potentially a bit more liver overwhelm in terms of the metabolic disposal of that. But it's really interesting because it seems to me, just off the top of my head, that when you're consuming it, in between meals, maybe the liver is not getting so overwhelmed, and you're giving a dose that is able to be handled metabolically. And that results in a different hormonal response and hormonal profile in the body. It's curious. It's a really cool study.
This was completely statistically insignificant, but just when you do look at the amount of food that was consumed ad libitum, which if anybody doesn't know, it just means like you're eating whatever you want. You're not in a restricted manner. You're eating to just hunger levels. The high sugar, high fat group with higher frequency, the 6 meals a day, they actually did eat a little bit more, just slightly, like maybe 100 calories a day. So maybe with a 6-week study, the momentum was building there. But also what's interesting to me, I think this goes to the study groups, the fact that they picked 39 young men who were already very, very lean. I mean, these are lean guys. These guys all at a BMI of 22, they've got abs. And so their appetites, just by their phenotype, they just may not be people who eat a lot of food or metabolically they use it. So I don't know if they weren't kind of pre-selected inadvertently to just not overeat anyway. So now that they're getting this extra food, they're like, okay, wow, I'm done checking out. And those, I will say one more thing to just the assumptions we can make about normal human behavior. I think average people who aren't dieting, and you go do a survey of 100 really, really lean people who aren't necessarily trying to be lean, this is just who they are, like my wife, and then you see people who are struggling with their weight. My wife only eats 2 or 3 times a day. She's okay not eating for 8 hours a day. She's just not hungry. And so the groups here, when you added the food to their meals, sure, they got fuller, but they were probably just kind of used to that anyway. And then you start throwing these extra snacks into their bodies, and that's when those groups, had the bigger change.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly in that phenotype, as you know, Joe. I mean, my normal walking around body style looks, pretty close to pre-contest 12 months out of a year. And I'm like, Tracy, I just don't, like, I don't care. I don't notice not having food. If I'm busy, I'm busy. And it's just, I'm fine with that. I don't have that hunger. That was one of the other thoughts I had about this. Would have been very interesting to see what, if they did, then I know these are really unreliable self-reported hunger scales and stuff, but it would have been interesting to see before and after self-reported hunger scales, because if you had that group that had the drop in serotonin having a higher hunger scale as compared to the other groups, that would also be really, I think, interesting and helpful in interpretation.
Exactly. Yeah. There certainly was a lot left on the table. And as detailed as the study was, I mean, they're doing, photon imaging of this. So, I mean, I think it's incredibly difficult just to get people to do blood draws multiple times. Then you think of something like biopsies, and now you've got to spend the money to do all this radiological imaging with radioactive dye. I mean, like, wow. So I do agree. I mean, I'm sure they just hit their threshold with how many things they could look at in one study. But this was in, I think, 2013. I would be interested to see if there was more on this specifically with hunger. So maybe that's what we need to do next with our research reviews.
Yeah, it's subjective, but on the other hand, it's also meaningful because if those hormones drive perceived hunger, then that's important if you're studying what the changes in the hormones are.
And on that note, let me give a nod to some of the other research that we've gone over. If you guys remember, I love to quote this study where they trained people with glucometers to understand what their own blood sugars were. And the training was this: you eat food and that food gets digested. When the final remnants of that food leaves your stomach, phase 3 contractions of your stomach are violent. I mean, they are pushing that food exquisitely hard into the small intestine. And then you get this barometric response of hunger, which is like, wow, I'm hungry. You get a hunger pang that almost punches you in the gut. And yet all of that food is just entering your small intestine. Blood sugar's on the rise, blood amino acids, lipids are on there. You shouldn't be hungry. You're not hungry. We call that hunger when it's really what is the empty hollow sensation as titled in literature. So to train these people to say, wait, that's not hunger. Don't think of that as hunger. We, the researchers, telling you that's no longer hunger. You can't call it hunger. We're going to train you with glucometers to know when your blood sugar is here, and you see that little weak feeling you're getting. You're feeling kind of lethargic. Maybe your legs feel heavy. Now you're hungry. That's hunger, because now your blood sugar is low enough. Now, instead of 2 to 3 hours later when you get that hunger pang, now we're 4, 5, 6 hours when your body needs the food. So in 7 weeks, they trained adults and children. And if you remember, the children were even better at it than the adults, to learn interoceptively. Oh, now I know when I need to eat. I'm not supposed to eat when I'm, quote, hungry, just because I feel that sensation. This is what low blood sugar hunger really feels like. I need to wait to eat when I'm hungry. Those people who learned to do that versus the control group who didn't get that training, the control group didn't lose any weight. The other group, without a diet, without counseling, without macros, 34% of them lost weight just by learning what real hunger was. So I do think, Jen, with a 30% reduction in serotonin, depending on how that affects people differently, I just wonder, how hungry we really feel. It is subjective to interpret, but I think person to person, we know those changes. I've talked to clients for 30 years and they report less hunger. They report more hunger. Like, they know in their bodies what they're feeling. And so how much of this is chemically driven through something like serotonin, is, to your point, something that'd be very, very interesting to find out.
By the way, happy birthday, Kevin.
Thank you. I've enjoyed a nice lunch with Andra, and that's the day. In-laws invade tomorrow, so
he's finally old enough to drink.
yeah, I'm still drunk 16 years ago since then.
Well, any other thoughts or comments from other people here? Everybody's just kind of listening in, which is totally fine. Good. I'm glad you guys all showed up here. As I mentioned, for the last couple weeks, we did change the time, so we're going to stay with this time from now on. So if you're here, you understand what time we're doing this. Mondays and Fridays. Mondays are for our clients and coaches. Fridays, research review, open to the public. As we get closer to the end of the month, there's a week or two I'll have to stop because of an event we're doing, a coaching event here. But any final thoughts or questions? This one was so specific. I thought we could kind of wrap it up pretty tightly, but I don't know. I'm still stuck between, since this is for hypercaloric reasons. If I need to say, hey, I'm gonna just keep most of my fat in my meals, and if I need a snack, I'm gonna try not to eat fat. I don't know if we can really say that or not, but I think we can say that to perhaps not gain, if you're kind of eating for maintenance, maybe it is best to not snack as much, to get a couple larger meals in, and maybe not have as much fat in all of those meals. I think that's at least something that'd be responsible. Go ahead, Don.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Fantastic presentation. Really, really great information. Just a couple of thoughts on the serotonergic system, and just the study itself. So, one possibility, I don't know if they went into it, but with the SPECT studies, the possibility exists that what occurred was a decreased reuptake of serotonin. So they saw an increase of serotonin, and that what may be occurring, as an interesting note, is in the glucose in between, that you're getting a spiking of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So you're getting kind of a fight or flight, which serotonin actually engages, in suppression. And from a hormonal component too, acting in the gut. So it may be that with these smaller meals, particularly with people who a lot of people under stress, having a sensitivity to activation through glucose. And the fat impact, I don't know, but just as a possibility, I think the conclusions you're drawing are probably accurate. But it would be great to have groups with people who are obese or women, and see what the changing profile is.
That's one of the things I wanted to as well, Don, to see in those different demographics. And I meant to have my other laptop here where I could look at the study in real time, because the way they did measure this, that they talked about, first of all, I don't think it had an issue with uptake. They specifically were looking at one part of the hypothalamus. And again, because my neuroanatomy, neurophysiology stops short of going this far. But I can send you this study, because I think the way the researchers set it up was to avoid something like that, like just looking at a mock SSRI scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
But I have to shoot that your way.
Thank you, brother.
All right, guys. Well, I will let you go for now. It is Good Friday, actually. So I'm glad you guys, so many people wandered out for this. And you guys watching on the playback, please let me know if you have any questions. And as I said, I think I want to extend this. It's just opened a door or two that both Jen and Don were describing, like, what if there's some more, like, this doesn't give us the whole picture, but it would be nice to have this or this. So I'm gonna scan some research and see if indeed there is anything useful that might have come after this that could be tagged on. So you guys have a great weekend, and hopefully I will see you next week.